I have a question that actually scares me. Now, we all know the Pharisees, right? They're the bad guys of the Gospels, the hypocrites, the villains. But as I was studying this week, I had to stop and look in the mirror, and I had to ask myself, is that me? Am I a Pharisee? And where does a question like that even come from? Well, it comes from the text that we're reading today. Now, open your Bibles to Matthew chapter 23. Now, if your Bible is a red letter edition like this one, you're going to notice something immediately. It's a sea of red ink. Now, if you're new to the Bible, a red letter edition simply means that the publishers print every word spoken by Jesus in red ink. Usually you see red mixed with black for narration, but here, aside from the very first verse, the entire chapter was virtually uninterrupted red text. And why does this matter? Because this is the last public sermon that Jesus ever gave. He didn't end his ministry with a gentle parable. No, he ends it with a wall of red text, a stinging extended judgment against religious hypocrisy. He isn't just giving a quick correction, he's shouting a warning to anyone who claims to follow God. And that's why we have to ask the hard question. But if Jesus spent so much time warning against this kind of attitude, we'd better make sure that we don't have it, right? And today, we're looking in the mirror. We're breaking down Matthew chapter 23, the 7 woes and the danger of looking the part while missing the heart of God. Here we go, verses 1 through 12. Talk about the seat of Moses. Now, the scene is tense. Jesus turns to the multitudes and to his disciples, and he first starts by establishing something very important about authority. Matthew 23, verse 2 and 3 says, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. Therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, that observe and do. But do not do according to their works, for they say and do not." Now, Moses' seat refers to the authority to teach the law of God. And Jesus respects the office, but he rejects the officer. He tells the people, listen to the Bible verses that they quote, but don't imitate the lives that they lead. Why? Because they just don't practice what they preach. Now, verse 4 says, they bind heavy burdens on people. They had hundreds of extra rules, but they won't lift a finger to help people carry them. But the root cause wasn't just legalism, it was ego. Jesus gives us 2 cultural examples in Matthew 23:5. The phylacteries and the borders of their garment. Now, a phylactery is a small leather prayer box that Jewish men wear on their foreheads or their left arm, containing scriptural scrolls as a devotional aid during statutory times for prayer. It was meant to be a reminder of God's word, but the Pharisees made theirs extra large so that everyone would see how spiritual they were. They also enlarged the tassels on their robes, a symbol of faith turned into a billboard for vanity. They love the VIP treatment, the best seats at dinners, the best seats in church, being called Rabbi, Rabbi. But Jesus stops the disciples right there. Matthew 23:11 says, "But he who is the greatest among you shall be your servant." Now, in this world, we tend to climb the ladder to get better titles, right? But in the kingdom, we climb down the ladder to serve. Now the tone shifts completely. Jesus turns his eyes directly to the leaders, and what follows are the 7 woes. Now, in the Bible, woe is a very heavy word. It isn't just anger, it's an expression of deep grief and impending doom. Woe number 1, shutting the door, verse 13. Matthew 23:13. Jesus says that they shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. Now, this is a terrifying charge. Not only were they missing God themselves, but their rules and hostility were actually blocking other people who wanted to find God. They were gatekeepers who locked the gate. Woe number 2, the son of hell, verse 15. Jesus says in Matthew 23:15, "For you travel land and sea with one proselyte, and when he is one, you make him twice as much a son of hell as yourselves." Now, that word proselyte might be new to some of you. It basically means convert. Specifically, it refers to someone who wasn't born Jewish, but decided to fully convert to the faith, taking on all the laws and rituals. Jesus admits that the Pharisees worked hard. They traveled land and sea to find these people. But here's the tragedy. They weren't just leading the people to God, they were recruiting them into their legalism. They were teaching them that holiness came from following strict man-made rules rather than a change of heart. And often the new converts tried so hard to prove that they belong that they become even more fanatical and judgmental than the teachers themselves. Woe number 3, gold versus the temple, verses 16 through 22. In Matthew 23:16, Jesus confronts their teachers regarding oaths. Now, they taught that if you swore a promise by the temple, it didn't count. But if you swore by the gold of the temple, then you were bound to it. Matthew 23:17. Jesus asks them, "Fools and blind, for which is greater, the gold or the temple that sanctifies the gold?" He points out that they valued the gold more than God's presence. They'd lost all perspective on what was holy. Woe number 4, Gnats and Camels, verse 23 and 24. Now, this is one of the most famous verses, right? They were meticulous tithe payers. They would literally count out the leaves of their garden herbs, mint, anise, and cumin, to give exactly 10% to God. Matthew 23:23 says, fine, do that. But you ignore the big stuff, justice, mercy, and faith. He uses a humorous illustration in verse 24. Blind guides who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Now, to understand the point, you have to know the Jewish law. A gnat was a tiny insect, basically like a fruit fly, and it was considered the smallest unclean animal. And a camel was the largest unclean animal. And strict Pharisees would filter their wine or water through a cloth just in case a tiny fly had landed in it. They were terrified of accidentally swallowing a bug and breaking the law. And Jesus says, you're filtering out the smallest forbidden animals, but you're swallowing the largest ones. They were obsessed with minor details while committing massive sins. Woe number 5, the cup and the dish, verses 25 and 26. Now, imagine going to a restaurant. The waiter brings a polished, shiny cup, but you look inside and there's old, moldy coffee at the bottom. Would you drink from it? Well, of course not. Matthew 23:25 says, this is what they're doing spiritually. They polish their reputation on the outside, but inside they're full of greed and self-indulgence. Woe number 6, whitewashed tombs, verse 27-28. Now, historically, Jews would whitewash or paint tombs bright white before Passover so people wouldn't accidentally touch them and become unclean. In Matthew 23:27, Jesus turns this on them. He says, you're just like those tombs. You look bright and clean and righteous on the outside, but inside it's death, it's decay. Woe number 7, murdering the prophets, verses 29-36. Now, Jesus finally addresses their claim that they're better than their ancestors. They say we would never have killed the prophets, but Jesus knows their hearts. He predicts that he'll send them wise men and teachers, and they'll persecute them just like their fathers did. Now that brings us to the end of the woes. And after 7 woes, after the judgment, the tone changes completely. Jesus doesn't end his sermon with anger. He ends it with a lament. He looks out over the city of Jerusalem, the city God chose. And Matthew 23:37 says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing." Now that image, a hen gathering her chicks, is one of the most tender descriptions of God in the entire Bible. When a hawk or a storm comes, a mother hen opens her wings and the chicks run underneath for protection. She takes the blow so that they can be safe. But because they rejected their protector, they're left defensiveless. Verse 38 says, "See, your house is left to you desolate." Now, your house. Notice that he doesn't call it my father's house anymore. God is leaving the building. So we come back to the question that we started with. Am I a Pharisee? Now, it's easy to point fingers at the religious elite, but Matthew 23 challenges us to check our own hearts. Are we more concerned with how we look to others than how we look to God? Do we judge people on the minor details, straining out gnats, while ignoring mercy and love? And do we know the Bible but miss the Jesus in the Bible? Jesus doesn't want whitewash. He doesn't want a shiny exterior. He wants to gather us under his wings. He wants our hearts. So here's a question for you. Which of the 7 woes is harder for the modern church to avoid? Is it the focus on money, the gold of the temple? Or is it the whitewashed tombs, looking perfect while struggling on the inside? Let's talk about it in the comments below. Now this brings us to the end of this breakdown. Next in Matthew 24, we leave the temple and climb the Mount of Olives. Jesus is about to give his most detailed prophecy about the end times. And you don't want to miss that. So make sure you're subscribed. And if this video helped you, please hit the like button. It really helps the channel. My name is Ronald. I'll see you in the next video. God bless and have a great day.